After his death, they opened Johnny Cash's garage. What they found shocked the world. The door didn't so much creak as sigh, like an old friend admitting a secret, and the first thing anyone noticed was the smell. Engine oil, cedar, paper, and time. Shelves ran the length of the walls, sagging with cases and coffee cans that rattled when someone brushed past. In the corner, a battered workbench wore grooves from decades of tinkering, and on it sat a reel-to-reel deck with a strip of masking tape across the lid, hand-labeled in the same blocky scrawl that once signed millions of autographs. Nobody said a word. They didn't need to. The room spoke for itself, and it spoke in the only language that mattered here. The hum of wires, the scratch of pencil on paper, the clink of a tuner being set down after chasing a note until it surrendered. This wasn't a shrine built for cameras. It was a place that smelled like work. And that's why people leaned in. Because work tells the truth when legends get foggy, and this room had been telling the truth for years without anyone listening. The first gasp came when someone tugged open a milk crate stuffed with tapes, their edges worn soft as denim. A scratchy test tone flickered alive, then a voice the world knew as well as its own heartbeat filled the garage, steady, weathered, and close enough to touch. These weren't throwaway fragments. They sounded finished, confident, like messages he tucked away for later. The songs didn't care about trends or charts. They chased feelings with a directness that made you stop breathing for a beat. A few carried a grin at the end of a verse, the way he did when a line landed clean. Others felt like a hand on a shoulder during the longest night. Nobody argued about release dates or markets. In that moment, the room didn't care about business. It offered proof that he had kept a private conversation going with himself and the tape machine long after the house lights fell. And it wasn't nostalgia. It was new enough to wake people up. Just beyond the tapes lay notebooks bound with fraying elastic, pages filled from margin to margin in a handwriting that looked like footprints across fresh snow. There were lists and fragments, riddles and prayers, punchlines and confessions, the kind of scraps an artist keeps when he knows lightning can strike anywhere. Some pages were terrifically neat, titles underlined twice, others ran wild, lines elbowing for room. In one place, a song idea met a torn grocery list, coffee and strings sharing space like they always have in real life. He'd taped a coin over a coffee ring stain on one page, a joke to himself about paying the water bill. On the back of a tattered envelope, a single verse stared back like a dare. The notebooks weren't precious. They were fearless. They made it obvious why his voice sounded like it did. He lived with the songs until they trusted him, then he let them speak. That's the workbench secret most people never see. Two guitar cases leaned beneath a pegboard of tools, their latches nicked and dulled. Inside slept workhorses with stories in every scar. One neck wore a thumbprint divot deep enough to anchor a riverboat. Another carried a strip of black tape where a strap once rubbed through the finish. The strings rang bright but stubborn, tuned down a breath the way he liked them when the road got long. Tucked under the headstock of one instrument was a folded church flyer, the edges browned. On another, someone had left a paperclip shaped into a heart, the kind a kid might make while waiting side stage. The tools above told the rest: nut files, solder, a half-bent Allen key, a stack of polishing cloths that used to be shirts. He fixed what he could, thanked what he couldn't, and kept moving. The guitars weren't trophies. They were partners who knew every secret and didn't judge the bad nights. Pinned to a corkboard above the workbench were letters that looked as if they'd been handled 100 times. A warden thanked him for bringing light to a concrete place. An inmate wrote about the way a lyric felt like a window. A young songwriter, shaky with gratitude, swore he'd learned more from a handshake than any class. Some messages were from mothers, some from preachers, some from people who never signed their names. Tucked among them were postcards from the road. Phoenix heat, London rain, a scrawled note about coffee in a town where the diner's neon buzzed like a hornet. A single Polaroid showed a row of folding chairs on a gym floor, the kind that squeal when you shift your weight. On the back, he'd written 2 words: sing anyway. The letters made it obvious why he kept going when he could have stayed home. He didn't sing for applause. He sang for the echo that came back from people who needed those songs like oxygen. On a lower shelf sat a shoebox rattling with trinkets, lucky picks rubbed thin, a harmonica with one sticky reed, a silver lighter scarred by years of fidgeting. There was a pocket knife marked with initials, the kind you carry for decades until it becomes part of your pocket. There were old backstage laminates and a folded map with highways traced in red pencil, a road diary in lines and arrows. Receipts from repair shops told a parallel history, alternators swapped, tires patched, amps recapped after a tube cooked itself during a summer fair. A napkin carried the name of a roadside mechanic who stayed late and took nothing but a handshake because his dad loved those songs. The shoebox clattered with the kind of luck you only make by showing up, the kind that follows people who keep their word when the weather turns and the gig runs long. It all added up to a truth you could hold. Greatness is 1,000 tiny habits, not a single burning star. Then came the drawer nobody expected. Inside lay a small stack of photographs wrapped in brown paper, the twine knotted with care. The images were candid, caught between moments. A grin shared backstage with a partner who knew every harmony, a head bowed in prayer before a risky song, a glance toward the wings where family waited. There was one picture of a lake at dusk, the water dark as coal, a porch light on across the cove. Another showed a cabin studio with an open door and a chair turned toward a microphone. The photos didn't try to make him larger than life. They shrank the world to the size of a human heart beating fast before a song, to a quiet chair under a lamp, to a man who measured time not by awards but by the lives braided into his own. If fame ever crowded the doorway, these pictures asked it to wait outside while real life got its turn. People love the clean lines of a rise-fall redemption story, but the items on those shelves told a messier, truer tale. There were reminders of missteps, near catastrophes on the road and off it, choices that singed the edges of a life until someone or something pulled it back from the brink. Tucked between ledgers were printed clippings about a disastrous blaze out west, the kind that scorches reputations along with hillsides, and a payment stub that said restitution in plain type. A yellowed note in the margin read, "Learn, don't posture." Another folder held court paperwork and a pastor's phone number underlined twice. The garage didn't hide the shadow, it filed it, labeled it, and kept it where it could be seen. That's how you carry the dark without letting it carry you. That's how you face it when it knocks. That's how you say, out loud, "I did this," and then do better. If you stood still long enough, the garage began to feel like a conversation between the man and his shadow. There were Sunday morning reminders taped to the wall next to Saturday night set lists. A rosary coiled in a coffee tin lay beside a jar of screws. A dog-eared Bible shared shelf space with a pocket handbook on electronics, as if salvation might need a soldering iron now and then. The place wasn't curated. It was lived in. He tinkered here. He prayed here. He chose strings here. He argued with melodies here and lost on purpose. He came back when he felt strong and when he didn't. The garage looked like a person who kept trying until trying turned into doing. That's the story people forget to tell when they talk about legends. Behind the myth, there's a workday. And behind the workday, there's a choice you make when nobody's watching. Near the garage window was a trunk that required 2 people to lift. Inside were stage jackets wrapped in muslin, their cuffs frayed from nightly fists on microphones. A tailor's card was pinned to a lapel with one instruction: leave room to breathe. The lining of one coat hid a whisper of crimson like a secret smile. A hat brim, sweat darkened at the band, curled where fingers had pulled it low to fight the glare. These were uniforms for battle, but they weren't armor. You could see through the wear that the man inside them took the hits and kept stepping forward. He didn't need to be invincible. He needed to be consistent. The clothes in that trunk remembered thunder and grace, cheap sound systems and perfect silences when a room decided to listen together like a prayer. You can't fake that. Clothes know the truth. Close to the floor stood a crate of letters from family. Gentle corrections, fierce encouragement. and reminders that stage lights can't warm a cold house. One note framed the simplest truth. He mattered most as a husband, a father, and a neighbor long before headlines distilled him into a silhouette. That reality hummed through the garage like an amplifier on standby. For all the myths, this was a life constructed from daily work and flawed courage. He stumbled and got up. He promised and sometimes failed and then promised again. He kept choosing the hard call even when the easy one smiled real pretty. If there was glory in that, it wasn't the kind that fits in a trophy case. It was the kind you feel in your ribs when you turn the lights off and know you told the truth. The vehicles out back told their own stories. A touring car sat beneath a dust cover, its once velvet ride now stubborn and still. A relic of late-night escapes from venues and dawn arrivals at diners where coffee tasted like victory. Tucked in a glove compartment, a matchbook held a phone number that led to an old friend, the kind you can call after months and start mid-sentence. There was a service bill from a coach builder known for polishing luxury into legend, proof that even a road warrior likes to ride smooth when the miles get long. Someone whispered that the odometer had rolled over so many times it forgot how to count. Maybe that's true. Maybe it doesn't matter. What mattered was the map tucked beside it. Roads marked in thick red pencil toward towns that rarely make the posters, because the work happened there too. A faded ledger detailed donations that never made the papers, church roofs fixed, hospital bills eased, a neighbor's rent covered when winter got long. Beside it, a page recorded what he owed to others, debts of gratitude paid with songs, introductions, and late-night calls returned. The math was imperfect in the best way. If the world totaled his accounts now, it would still come up short on the balance of mercy. That ledger might be the most valuable thing in the room, not because of money, but because it proved the rarest habit of fame: remembering. People who remember don't need to announce it. They show it in commas and checks and phone calls made when nobody is keeping score. By the time the cataloging finished, the garage had turned into a kind of biography, one that valued context over spectacle. The artifacts connected in unlikely ways: a scrap of lyric tucked inside a maintenance manual, a hospital bracelet resting beside a pickguard, a photo of clasped hands near a receipt for new strings. The pattern suggested a person whose greatest instrument was not his voice or his guitar, but his stubborn, generous heart. He never pretended time wouldn't win, he just made sure the time he had counted. He gave it order, gave it jokes, gave it tenderness, and gave it away when someone needed the hours more than he did. If that sounds simple, it's because the hardest lessons wear simple clothes. And yet, for all the clarity, the room still kept a few secrets. In a biscuit tin under the bench lay a tiny cassette labeled in pencil with a date and a single word: home. The track that played was simple: voice, guitar, a whisper of harmonica, and it felt like he'd left it there on purpose, not as a goodbye, but as a hand on the shoulder to whoever found it next. No tricks, no swagger. Just a melody walking straight down the center of the road, leaning into the wind, refusing to quit before the horizon. People left the garage changed. Some called old friends. Some dusted off instruments. Some wrote letters they should have written years ago. The place didn't scold, it invited. Every shelf said, "Start where you are." Every ding in the wood said, "You can recover." Every scrap of paper said, "Ideas prefer motion." If there was anything shocking about the discovery, it wasn't that a legend had left behind trophies. It was that he'd left a workshop designed to outlive him, a room that turned nostalgia into responsibility. The shock wasn't that it existed. The shock was how much it asked of the rest of us. In the weeks that followed, people kept arguing about what mattered most. Was it the pristine reel marked with a title that would later make headlines, or the scrap of verse that read like a blessing? The gleaming car with the storyteller's mileage, or the guitar with the worn-out frets that refused retirement? The answer, like most things here, refused to choose. The garage insisted the whole story mattered, that broken things and shiny things belong in the same tale, and that redemption doesn't erase the past. It teaches it to sing harmony. If you came looking for scandal, you could find the echoes. A headline tacked up as a cautionary tale, a receipt that meant reckoning, the reminder that fame comes with a bill nobody else can pay. If you came searching for proof of goodness, that was here too. Anonymous gifts, notes to prisoners and preachers, scribbles to himself about calling home. But if you came hunting for him, hoping the room might speak his name back to you, the garage had a better idea. It handed you tools and told you to build something worth handing to the next set of hands. That's the trick only the great ones pull off. They don't freeze you in awe, they appoint you with a task. So what did they really find? Unreleased songs, sure. Drafts that will outlive all of us, definitely. Instruments that still smelled like the road. Coats that remembered the weight of applause. Wheels that once outran dawn. But beneath all that, they found instruction, forgiveness, and a dare. They found a blueprint for how to keep going when the trail gets steep. They found proof that the man in black didn't just wear a color. He carried people through the dark until they saw morning again. There's a story that when he was asked why he kept returning to concrete yards and barbed wire crowds, he shrugged and said that songs travel farther when you carry them to the places that feel forgotten. The garage understood that mission. It wasn't a museum whispering, "Don't touch." It was a classroom inviting everyone to try. It made people want to fix the broken latch, restring the tired guitar, and call the person who needs to hear a friendly voice at midnight. It turned memory into motion, which is the only kind of memory that matters. In time, the family would share parts of what they found, careful and proud, the way you hold a fragile heirloom in two hands. Listeners would swear they could hear the sawdust in the background of certain tracks, the sympathetic rattle of tools whenever a low note hit. Maybe that's imagination, or maybe that's how legacy works. Traces of the room lingering in the room the music now makes inside us. Either way, the discovery felt less like opening a vault and more like opening a window. Before that door closed for good, someone pinned one last note to the corkboard. It wasn't a quote or a lyric, it was a question. What will your garage hold? The letters were plain, but the challenge was not, because that's what this place finally revealed. He didn't stockpile souvenirs of glory. He prepared supplies for the next person's fight. The shock wasn't the relics. The shock was the responsibility. There was one more corner people almost overlooked, a shallow shelf above the window where sunlight made dust look like snowfall. Up there, stacked 3 high, were plain envelopes sealed with brittle tape. Each held a single page. On every page, a sentence. Some were reminders to himself. Right before breakfast, listen harder than you sing. Call your mother. Some were promises. Be kinder to the crew. Play the song the audience needs. Send flowers when you can't show up. Reading through them felt like eavesdropping on a person coaching his future self. In the margins were ticks and dates, proof he'd returned to these sentences again and again, testing them the way you test a chord until it rings true. They weren't slogans. They were guardrails, hammered in by a man who knew how easy it was to slide into the ditch when the crowd gets loud and the night gets long. That feeling deepened when a narrow box slid free from behind a stack of music stands. Inside, wrapped in brown paper and twine, lay a microphone dented along the grill, the sort of scar that comes from doing its job. A scrap of tape on the handle said, "spare." It was the most humble word in the room, and maybe the most accurate one. Even the famous guitars and stitched jackets felt secondary beside it. A spare tool, ready when someone else needed to speak. That, finally, unlocked the room's last secret. Greatness is generous. The real inheritance wasn't just the tapes or the notebooks. It was the example of making space for other voices. The garage didn't brag about that, it simply kept the spare right where anyone could find it and carry the song forward.